Well, as I said, I think even, certainly in rural areas I can see the logic and why you would need a bit of flexibility there. I personally think a bit of flexibility is required in the urban areas as well, depending on the need to deliver, notwithstanding the critical importance of not reinforcing or underpinning unaffordable prices. But as I said, given a stark choice between a vulture fund buying up houses and the local authority buying them, I'd for the local authority buying them rather than us letting the vulture funds having them and then having to lease them off them. So I'm open to that sort of flexibility if that's what the Minister is saying. But I would just say I'm very conscious that we are going to hit a guillotine in about 10 or 15 minutes, and that multiple groupings are not going to be reached. And one particular issue, therefore, I would just like to maybe get a response from the Minister, given we're not going to even get to this, is one group of people that have been very, very hard done by in terms of not being eligible for social housing, having previously been so, and then there being no affordable housing scheme for, well, forever. I think a special sort of provision needs to be made for them, Minister, and I would urge you to do so in terms of the eligibility criteria and the prioritisation for affordable housing. The people who were on a list for 10 or 15 years were heartbroken, many of them, and have been year after year heartbroken when, having been on that list, their income goes slightly over the threshold, and then all those years are gone and there is no affordable scheme. And I think there should be, I saw there was a lottery for the Balbriggan project. I see a certain fairness in that, but on the other hand, for people, I really think people who've been knocked off lists, and given that the income thresholds for social housing, which I think many of them should be restored to, by the way, because they should be raised, they are too low and they haven't been raised, but those who, if that's not going to happen, and in my opinion it should, then those people should be given some level of priority in terms of eligibility for affordable schemes, whether it's cost rental or whether it's affordable purchase, given they lost years and years and years, in many cases a decade or more, on a housing waiting list for it all to come to nothing. So I would just say that. And lastly, because we may not get a chance to speak again on any of this, but it does relate to the open market. Minister, there are things in this, and I want to acknowledge that you did listen to some of the stuff that we raised on undue segregation and changing that and so on. And in some areas, even the point of pointing things towards people's income and ability to pay, although I think that should be in this legislation, and I think our notion of 25% or 30%, as others have proposed, is something that could have been in this legislation. I do take your point about arbitrary caps and so on, that there's a difficulty with them, but I don't think setting a proportion of the income in order to ensure affordability was something you couldn't have put in this legislation, so that the market doesn't dictate, because that is the key thing. The market mustn't dictate the supply, it shouldn't dictate the cost, and it most certainly shouldn't dictate the price or the rent of the affordable housing. People's income, their ability to pay for ordinary working families, should be the absolute critical issue in terms of delivering affordable housing. But given that you have continued to include public-private partnership in this, and the shared equity scheme, which, people who are not left-wing by any stretch of the imagination, whether it's people in your own department, the central bank, the ESRI, saying that the shared equity scheme is likely to reinforce unaffordability, drive up the prices of homes. Although there are things that are good in this bill, these are critical issues. They are absolutely critical issues for us, and I can't bring myself, and our group can't bring ourselves to support a bill that is going to include the shared equity scheme or the PPPs, much as there are other aspects of it that we'd welcome, and indeed the concern that many of the key areas that need to be in this bill are not, and are pushed back to regulations which we have not seen and where we don't know what's going to be in those regulations. regulations.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan. Nobody else offering. Minister, please.
Just very briefly with Deputy Boyd Barrett's point, there will be exceptions and exemptions for people. The affordable housing scheme, I think we discussed this, would allow, let's say, someone who would have gone through a marriage breakup or divorce, doesn't previously owned a property but doesn't have any financial interest in the property, they would be able to apply. Someone who's gone through personal insolvency, the last crash, they don't own a property. I think we need to be flexible in that space, and we're going to be, and certainly around that's absolutely my intention. Problematic, I get your point in relation to people who've dropped off the social housing list. Affordability, if we get it right, the next form of cost rental tenure, affordable purchase as well, is going to be for that cohort of people who are above those limits, and that's where I would actually see it happening. But we need to start it some way, and whilst certainly in Taylor Hill and Balbriggan, a lottery was held because it's the fairest way of doing it. I want to get to a stage where we're delivering literally thousands of affordable homes. We all want that, where you can have a lottery right now is the fairest way. Anyway, to deal with the questions specifically put down, because I know the deputies are asking, I can't, as they will know, legislate for certain parts of the country, okay? So I want to be really honest with people that this is to give the flexibility under the Affordable Fund, or as it currently is under the Service Sites Fund as we know it, that should a local authority, they would still have to apply to us to say, okay, if two houses on number, you know, they have to be new, and they're for these people who meet the eligibility criteria. Where I would see it being used very much is in our more areas where there is not a great deal of development outside of the cities. But I want to be honest with you, I don't see it as being exclusively necessarily that. That option would be there. But where I see the delivery, if we look at the Service Sites Fund right now, that will be funding about 4,200 homes. But each of those, they have to apply to the department and say, well, here's our scheme. Now, I want to have an open call, so that fund is open and all local authorities can put a call through. So as we were talking about Tipperary earlier on, that if Tipperary come forward with the scheme that is a mix of social and affordable, the affordable housing provisions that we're going to pass here, be it affordable purchase or cost rental, will apply everywhere across the country. So to allow this element of flexibility, we would still have oversight for it. So do I see any of the, the 8 or 9 big local authorities just approving individuals to use the Service Sites Fund to buy a new home? I don't really, to be honest with you, but we need to allow that flexibility to be there, particularly in areas where development may be constrained or never at a grand scale. And actually in parts of the country we have a real issue with viability, full stop. Borders, Midlands, right the way down, where there's no private housing being built at all, where the only building that's happening is public housing. Now, public housing being social housing. So I now think there's an opportunity for us to allow a mix within that of the home ownership type that we want, of the cost rental that we want, which frankly is more sustainable as well. It's a more sustainable system for public housing if we've a mix of those within it. And so I hope I've explained that to deputies as best I can. The provision will apply obviously across the state, but where I see it used most is in areas where there would be constraints in relation to affordable housing delivery or development in the near term. And we'll always keep these under review as well.